Vaughn, let me read you this from the New York Times today. On the main stage at the Republican National Convention this week, some Trump campaign trademarks have been missing. There have been no celebrations of the January 6 rioters and no talk of election mules smuggling ballots. Even references to Democrats cheating in elections are so spare they could be easy to miss. But across the street, it's a different story. There in so-called Media Row, the hive of right-wing activists galvanized by former President Trump's lies about the 2020 election was buzzing. Podcasters chatted about plans for paper ballots and hand counts. Mike Lindell, the Pillow Company founder, who is one of the most prominent promoters of conspiracy theories about election fraud, gave interviews about rigged voting machines. Republicans have largely kept this cohort on the fringes of its big primetime show, while more politically palatable messages take center stage. But it's still there, Vaughn. We had Jim Rutenberg and Nick Corsadini on, who had a great piece on Saturday morning about the efforts to prevent certification of the election in 2024, especially if it looks like Trump isn't coming out on top. Just talk about how that's been papered over this week.
And if I may, I think that the individual who received the greatest ovation last night was none other than Peter Navarro, who came straight from federal prison, straight here to Milwaukee to the stage to deliver a message that he spent 3 months in prison because he refused to comply with a congressional subpoena from the January 6th Select Committee. And the invitation to Peter Navarro to speak on this stage, and Peter Navarro told us that he was not asked to edit any of the contents of his speeches, were, I think, notable because unlike the Democratic Party right now, let's be clear, this is a Republican Party, Nicole, that is not scared of its own shadow. It is not scared of who it is or who it is associated with. A few moments ago, we saw Paul Manafort here on the convention floor. Of course, Paul Manafort was pardoned in 2020 by Donald Trump after he was found guilty on federal charges of bank and tax fraud and sentenced to 7 years in prison. You also have the likes of Roger Stone here in Milwaukee. He was also pardoned by Donald Trump. You also have Rudy Giuliani here on the convention floor. You also have a number of fake electors on the convention floor. You have Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who you'll recall was the very first individual to receive a pardon on federal charges from Donald Trump here. And this is a party that understands it doesn't need Paul Ryan to win Wisconsin. It is not trying to convince John Boehner to come on this stage or the likes of John Kasich onto this stage to come and win the state of Ohio. It is comfortable with its identity and who it is here. And that is not the case for the last largely 8 years, where there was concerns about the stain that some individuals, some of these right-wing media outlets, you know, the likes of a Laura Loomer, may have on the America's view of what this party is. But over the course of 20 months now, since Donald Trump first launched his primary campaign, they have been really a Teflon. Donald Trump has not taken any political hits, and he and his campaign team understand that right now, at this point in time, that there is one party that is comfortable in its own skin and doesn't need to go and try to win over the likes of Mike Pence to win the general election. Instead, it's the Democratic Party that is concerned over its identity right now and its strength and its concern of its own shadow, Nicole.
Let me just push back curiously, not combatively. I mean, he hasn't taken any hits. Nikki Haley was humiliating him as recently as 5 weeks ago by winning 20–30% of the vote months after she'd pulled out. He was convicted and rather frantically saw the polls where he slipped among independents. And, you know, in its defense, the Democratic Party sees him for exactly as you just described him, unapologetically associating with other felons who he himself pardoned. People waving mass deportation signs. If he's so sure he doesn't need the middle, why did he push Mike Lindell off the stage?
I think two parts of that. I think, Nicole, it's a good question on the Mike Lindell front. I think, to be very fair, that's a question that I should ask. But I would say here, at the same time, I think it's notable when you have Nikki Haley take the stage here. She didn't take the stage 8 years ago at the Cleveland convention. At the time, we were having a lot of conversations about folks who were Republican elected officials who were concerned about the stain that associating with Donald Trump could have on them. But she tried to beat him. She lost, but she quickly came back up onto stage. stage. And a great many in the Republican Party, elected officials, understand the power dynamic here in 2024. And the second part of that is, look what they printed on the campaign signs here. It was mass deportations now, right? There was not it's not just Stephen Miller in the background advising Donald Trump on what 2025 could look like, but it is printed on these convention signs that were held by the delegates on the floor that mass deportations now, and the crowd here chanting, send them back. It is, I think, at least at the activist and elected official level here of the heart of the Republican Party today, there is little fear about the pushback on its policies or its identities or associating with Donald Trump here, and that's a certain level of strength. As for Mike Lindell, I'll go and try to track him down, and I'll come back to you tomorrow with that answer, Nicole.
You know, Charlie, I accept all of Vaughn's reporting as the final word and as fact. And I think that they feel strong doesn't mean they are strong electorally. And I think this is where the whole frame around the process on the Democratic side is premature and could end up being wrong. It's a sign of strength that the Democrats understand that an effectively prosecuted case against all that, thinking it's good that Laura Loomer's walking around and everyone's wearing, you know, mass deportation signs in their bag and getting ready to wave them around in front of the cameras because they're unashamed, isn't the same as being unafraid of losing. If they were unafraid of losing, they wouldn't be rigging the certification process. They wouldn't be suppressing the vote in every way they have. They wouldn't be filing lawsuits to make sure that no one can drop off a 4-time signed ballot in a drop box, which is the most secure kind of ballot. So the projection of strength is central to Donald Trump's brand, but it should never be conflated with actual political strength.
Well, it also shouldn't be conflated with anything that is normal in American politics. And we've said this before, but think about where we are tonight. Think about where we are this week. I think it was Lenin who said that sometimes whole decades happen in weeks. Sometimes now it feels like whole decades are happening in days. And, you know, we shouldn't look away from how bizarre it is that this convention, which is very optimistic and very cocky, is about to nominate a 2-time impeached former president who tried to overthrow the election, who incited an attack on the Capitol, who is a convicted felon, who's been found liable for rape. And yet they are all in on this. And as Vaughn has also said, they're all in on some of the most extreme elements of this agenda. You know, so I hope that people don't get distracted by the show here or think that, oh, tonight Donald Trump became presidential, because he's still the same guy. And this party may be feeling the wind at its back right now, and there's some reason for that. But also, we need to focus on what are you actually saying. And I'm glad he mentioned the mass deportation, because, you know, before anyone says we have a new tone or they're moderating it or this was a different Donald Trump has told us who and what he is many times over the last few years. And one of the things that this convention is absolutely committed to doing is the forcible deportation of maybe 10 to 20 million migrants. Now, that would be one of the great humanitarian, I think, crises of our time. And they haven't explained how they're going to do that, deploying the military, rounding people up, demanding their papers, separating families, putting them in mass detention camps, putting hundreds of thousands of people in boxcars. And so while the Republicans are celebrating how great this moment is, these questions are still hanging over them, as is how totally strange it is for a party of law and order to be embracing one convicted felon after another. So again, you know, as we talk about this, let's not get distracted by this political moment or this political poll or the mood of the people who are here and forget what the stakes are for the rest of us.
Then I see the disinfectant that knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that.
That really happened. Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in the East. I apologize for making you relive that. But at this moment in our politics, it's important to remember exactly what we all went through the last time he was president. the suffering, the many, many investigations into him and his own conduct, the damage done to our institutions, the eroding of democracy, that history attempting to be whitewashed this week by the GOP at the Republican National Convention, as the New York Times opinion writes, quote, "This week, Republicans have tried to rewrite the 4 years of Trump's presidency as a time of unparalleled peace, prosperity, and tranquility. But under his leadership, the country lurched from one crisis to the next, from the migrant families separated at the border to the sudden spike in prices caused by his trade war with China, to the reckless mismanagement of the COVID pandemic. And he showed over and over and over how little respect he has for the Constitution and those who take an oath to defend it. And what lies ahead, if Trump should prevail in November, will be much, much worse, according to him. We know this. He has told us it's on paper this time. Donald Trump has openly talked about implementing the largest deportation in American history, stacking federal agencies with an army of his loyal disciples, going after and pursuing and prosecuting his enemies using the levers of the federal government, withdrawing the country from our global alliances, things like NATO. It would mean an end to the America we know and love. We cannot lose sight of that as the ex-president projects whatever he projects this week and formally accepts the Republican nomination again tonight. It caps off a multi-day event that has presented a choice before all of us, before the American people. It's not grounded in truth or reality. There is not a lot of toned-down rhetoric that they promised would come following the tragic attempted assassination over the weekend. The Daily Show points that out.
Word on the street was that the RNC speeches were going to be civil and polite now. So, bring on the good vibes.
The Democrats' disastrous record on crime, trade, and regulation has ruined the lives of countless Minnesotans.
Your family is less safe.
Biden's violent crime crisis.
Our children are dying.
War on families.
Woke indoctrination trampled underfoot by the radical left.
Biden and the Democrats are doing everything they can to tear down this great country.
America cannot afford 4 more years of a weekend at Bernie's presidency.
Kumbaya, my lord. Kumbaya. I mean, I guess this is toning it down. And for the record, it is totally unfair to compare Joe Biden's presidency to Weekend at Bernie's, okay? For one thing, Bernie could pass as an alive person, okay? Also, that movie got a sequel.
A perilous moment for American democracy that would be funny if it wasn't so scary. One candidate, our current president, sick with COVID, has calls from his own party to step aside or ratcheting up because the threat from the other, the wannabe autocrat, is too great, too vast. It's where we start the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. In Milwaukee at the convention, staff writer for The Atlantic, Tim Alberta, is here. Plus, political strategist, MSNBC senior analyst Matthew Dowd is here with us in New York. Former RNC spokesperson, host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller. Tim Alberta, you have written some pieces that, when the history of these times are told, will be in there, starting with your Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita reporting, and then your J.D. Vance reporting, and your other dispatches from the convention. So congratulations to you. Let's work backward, though. Take me inside this moment as we await what has been described as a somewhat changed Donald Trump.
Well, thank you, Nicole, first for saying that. It's very kind of you. Look, I think the degree to which Donald Trump has changed, has been transformed by this near assassination just a few days ago, we'll really get a glimpse at it tonight. And, you know, I have covered scores and scores of Trump's speeches around the country. I have traveled with his campaign at length over the last 8 years. I've seen him in a lot of different venues, in a lot of different moods, striking a lot of different tones. I've never heard a tone of humility, of reconciliation. I've never heard a tone of genuine reflection. And according to some people who are close to him and who have spoken with him since the events of last Saturday, they have heard traces of that. They have heard hints of that. And I think they are genuinely curious, as are the rest of us, whether that will come through tonight in prime time as the nation waits to hear from the former president for the first time since he was nearly killed. But Nicole, if past is at all prologue, I don't know that we should expect a dramatically different version of Donald Trump tonight. If we see one, then obviously that scrambles sort of everything we know about this campaign, this election, and even potentially the future of the country. But I think to say that we should expect that would be putting the cart way ahead of the horse.
Yeah, a cart that's never been spotted on the planet before. Tim Alberta, your reporting is so important and revealing about how they see the race. And you're reporting, the line that sort of kept me up all night the day that I read it, was that they are, in their view, what they're seeing is a landslide victory for Donald Trump. I wonder if you can sort of explain then the selection of J.D. Vance, and that landslide is predicated on running against Donald Trump, or running against Joe Biden, based on in your story and your reporting. What happens to all those predictions and assumptions, and even the J.D. Vance pick, if that ends up not being who they face in November?
Sure, Nicole, I'll take the first part and just emphasize that the J.D. Vance selection is the clearest indicator of the Trump campaign's confidence that they're not only winning this race, but that they are running away with this race. They believe that they are headed towards a blowout in November. And the J.D. Vance pick, as one person close to the president described it, he said, look, the revolution is on, right? That's the only proper interpretation of taking a guy like J.D. Vance, who has some baggage and who's not necessarily the person that you would select if you're worried about appealing to the suburban moms outside of Milwaukee and Detroit and Philly and Phoenix and elsewhere. But J.D. Vance does share at some core visceral level the sort of raw, visceral populism that Donald Trump has been successful in selling to the masses, and Trump sees in him an heir apparent to the MAGA empire here. However, it's clear that he would not have necessarily made this selection if we were in a really tight race. But the Trump campaign, from all of its modeling, all of the polling that they've done, they believe that the race is already effectively over. Now, if that's the case, if they have created a situation where by midsummer that they have already buried their general election opponent in Joe Biden, then of course they don't want to see the Democrats change horses. In fact, Nicole, what I reported from Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita after spending months with them is that this campaign, this Trump campaign, more than any other that I've covered, is very specifically engineered to run a very specific race against a very specific opponent in Joe Biden. And at this point, the Trump people are basically just praying that he doesn't leave the race, because if he does, and if they have to go back to the drawing board, it would force them to have to fundamentally recalibrate everything they've done, from the micro-targeting, the modeling, the money that they're spending, where they're spending it, the digital campaign that they're running. Everything that they have optimized in this campaign to date has been meant to defeat not a generic Democrat, but Joe Biden. And so they do not want to see him step aside.
I mean, Matt Dowd, the revolution is on in the room. And for all the critiques of President Joe Biden being in some sort of bubble, I mean, I understand the confident read, and I actually appreciate the confident posture, having worked on campaigns myself. But the reality doesn't really match that. I mean, the race is fluid. The point in the calendar isn't really, measure for your gold toilet done. Nothing's done. There's no fat lady singing. There's a lot of politics left to be played. And I wonder how much the public projection of strength and what Tim Alberta has been able to report may actually factor in, either consciously or subconsciously, to the very serious sort of pro-democracy alarm bells going off in the Democratic coalition.
Well, I think you've raised all valid points, and let me just second Tim Alberta and what he's done, being a fellow Michigander, and all the work he's done. Bravo to him and everything he's done in the course of the last few years. To me, this exuberance about whether or not they're going to win and by how much in a landslide, it made me think, do they think Joe Biden won in a landslide in 2020? because they're not going to win by 7 million votes, popular votes. It's just not going to happen possibly. And they're saying they're going to take all the states back. So basically what they're telling us is Joe Biden won in a landslide in 2020, and they think they're going to repeat that this time. This race is still so fluid, though there are some parameters of it very set. I don't think this convention this week's going to move a single voter. I don't think it's going to cause any bump. But the last 2 or 3, 4 conventions that have been held back to 2012 haven't really moved anybody in the course of this. The only time people get moved if there's a surprise or something major happens in the course of the convention. That didn't happen with the J.D. Vance pick. It was just ho-hum. Okay, here we go, another sycophant added on the ticket. What I think should worry the Trump campaign is, since the debate, they have basically had 21 or 22 straight positive days for themselves. They've had 21 or 22 positive straight days, and that's allowed them to stretch a lead to 2 or 3 points. That should be concerning to them about their candidate, and that should be concerning to them about their policies and their vision and what they're offering to the American public. Because in the course of a campaign in the summer, when you have 21 or 22 straight days that are beneficial to you and negative to the opposition, and you're only able to move the needle by 2 or 3 points in the course of the race, shows, one, this race is going to be close, though I do think Trump has an advantage today, especially electoral college wise. But this race is never going to stretch past the 3 or 4 point margin scale. It's just not, with the way things are polarized, with how Democrats are lined up, it's never going to be beyond 3 or 4 points. And a 3 or 4 point victory in a polarized environment is a significant victory.
Basil, I so appreciate you for all the conversations we've had in the last couple of weeks. I have some of Vice President Kamala Harris today doing what you just described. Let me play that.
Sure. In recent days, they've been trying to portray themselves as the party of unity. But here's the thing. If you claim to stand for unity, you need to do more than just use the word. You cannot claim you stand for unity if you are pushing an agenda that deprives whole groups of Americans of basic freedoms, opportunity, and dignity.
You know, Basil, there's this thing that happens, I think, in reaction to Donald Trump, and it's amazing how much he still shapes the entire political conversation, right? People shrink in reaction to him, in response to him. And Kamala Harris has, a lot of her speeches have happened in my hours. I've been fortunate the last couple of weeks. She's grown into that space. Yeah. And where he's sort of got the Republican Party, you know, sort of slipping into all of his, you know, wrinkles and creases, she's sort of elevated the entire conversation about the contrast. And it's about everybody. And I think one of the ways that humans have adapted to Trump is to say, oh, he won't come for me. It won't be me. Right. He's coming for everybody. I think that's clear in the 4 years of the presidency and the 4 years in sort of political exile, meeting with the likes of Nick Fuentes and Kanye, or whatever he calls himself. I mean, he will eventually come for everyone that isn't under his tent. What do you make? But just explain to me what you make of how this conversation is shaping up, specifically the things she's been pointing to.
Well, there are a couple of things. One, it shows, and you know, others have said this, that there's an incredible bench in the Democratic Party, right? That there are so many people who are so extraordinarily qualified at articulating the importance of this moment to talk about where we've been and where we have to go. But if you focus specifically on Vice President Harris, you know, one of the things that I've talked so much about is over the last few years, she has been this administration's secret weapon. She has an intersectionality embedded within her that can speak to so many corners of the party about the so many different ways in which multiple policies affect all of these communities going forward. When you're talking about black women's maternal health, whether you're talking about, you know, just racism, whether you talk about democracy, there's so many ways that she touches so many Americans Republicans in his story in many ways that J.D. Vance's story, however made up or contrived that has been, may not really speak to who he actually is as an individual and a candidate. But she has had this ability. I'll just say this one quick thing. I don't know if you had an opportunity to really talk about this, but one of the things that really struck me about Project 2025 and what Republicans are doing, there's a movement across the country to get rid of no-fault divorces. And one could say, what is the point of that? Like, why does that even matter? It matters because we have no-fault divorces in this country so that women didn't feel, particularly in situations where they were abused, that they had to stay in a marriage where at that time it was very difficult to get a divorce if the man in the marriage didn't want you to. And when you think about where we've come now, where all 50 states actually have these no-fault divorces, and that the Republicans are trying to take that away, you have to ask yourself, like, how low are they trying to go here? There is no bottom to the policy depths that they will go to kind of pull back and reel back time. And I think what Vice President Kamala Harris has been consistently saying is there is no going back. We have to move forward. We cannot go back. There is no backsliding. And I think that message, based on everything that has been said, that has been brought out, particularly about Project 2025, I think has really and solidly laid the foundation for that. And she has been the cornerstone of it.
John Heilemann, you've covered her a long time. You both hail from California. This piece that Basil picked out to highlight from a 900-page document is interesting because it does intersect with J.D. Vance's stated positions. In an interview, he now rather infamously said women should stay in marriages, including ones that are violent. Tell me how the contrast is shaping up now that it's Trump and all things Trump, plus J.D. Vance and all things J.D. Vance.
Well, honestly, Nicole, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead in the program, but I think the contrast. I think that the contrast would require a degree of focus that, frankly, right now the Democratic side doesn't have, because they are. Not to critique Vice President Harris's event today, but honestly, they are. And you've been there in a campaign, not quite in quite this place, but you know what it's like to be underwater, and when you're besieged, and when you're having an existential crisis in a campaign, you can go through. You can be trying to do some things in the world. You might be able to have Vice President can have a good event. You might be able to put out an ad, but in the end, all you're really doing is fielding the incoming on the matter at hand, which in this case is whether Joe Biden's going to end up remaining on at the top of this ticket or not. And I think, you know, what we're going to come out of this convention with is, because J.D. Vance, unlike Doug Burgum, who would have been a much harder target to do a contrast with, or unlike Marco Rubio, who is a very known commodity in American politics. Not to say that there weren't places where you could contrast yourself with Rubio's policies and points of view, but J.D. Vance was, among these three, the most incendiary, the most controversial, the one who's much furthest outside the mainstream of American political thought and of traditional Republican thought. And so there is a lot to go after with J.D. Vance. And for those people who think that Donald Trump made strategists out there who think that this was a risky pick, you know, I say two things, always remembering the bottom of the ticket in the end doesn't really matter. It's not what people vote for. They vote for the top of the ticket. We know this from 100 plus years of political science scholarship. But it is the case that the vice presidential debate, which the Trump campaign now seems to be indicating they're willing to do the debate that the Biden campaign wants, whether that's going to be Kamala Harris or not, that's another question. But the earlier debate in the summer on CBS, not pushing for the later debate on Fox News that they had originally pushed for, that will be because of the fact that if Kamala Harris is still on the ticket and has not moved up on the ticket, that will be quite a thing. A couple of highly trained lawyers who will be able to do some rock'em sock'em robots on a lot of issues, and it might be a place where, because of how controversial a lot of the issues that he's embraced are, it might be a place where a vice presidential debate might matter more than they traditionally do.
Well, let's deal with the injection of sort of reality-based analysis that you started with then, John Heilemann. There is a sense of paralysis, and I wonder if that inability to sort of dig out of the crisis mode in terms of donors, in terms of stories, in terms of Democratic officials writing letters. Jamie Raskin has a new letter out today that's searing and eloquent and devastating politically for Joe Biden. Just tell me your understanding of the state of play.
Well, look, just to say that in general, when the other party is holding its convention, although the party that's not holding the convention will try to counter-program some. That's traditionally the case. But in reality, you are the campaign. Whatever party is holding its convention is going to dominate media. And so in some ways, this actually isn't the worst week for there to be paralysis on the other side, because this was going to be the moment where the Republicans were going to have roadblock coverage, and especially after what happened last weekend with Donald Trump. That was going to get the stage is theirs this week, and the stage is his. Now, having said that, I think that for a lot of Democrats, whether they are on the side of wanting to see Joe Biden bow out, or they're on the side of wanting to see Joe Biden stay in, a lot of Democrats are freaking out on top of the original freak out over the fact that we're 3 weeks into this now, and there's still not clarity, and there's still not a resolution. And for all of the people who are going to say Joe Biden is making it very clear that he's staying on the ticket, I think that we have now seen that wall. This is the thing that, as you know, Nicole, in politics, you say you're staying in the race until the moment you drop out. That's true across all politicians I've ever covered. Everyone insists, I am never going to drop out, never going to drop out, never going to drop out, and now I'm dropping out. That's how it works. And so the reason that some people have always been skeptical about Joe Biden's insistence that he would stay in the race is because they've seen political history in nomination fights and occasionally at higher levels where the candidates who eventually step away have insisted, and sworn on a stack of Bibles for weeks or months that they would never leave under any circumstances, then they do. Right now, even from inside the Biden world, and I know there was some pushback, a public statement that was pushing back just within the last couple hours, but reporters are now hearing from senior people inside Joe Biden's world who a week ago maintained that there was no way he was going to step down, who are now saying things like, we get it's over, it's a question of when, not whether. That is what people who work for Joe Biden, and not junior people who work for Joe Biden, senior people, not at the very senior most levels, not the First Lady, not his son, Hunter, but others who are seeing the writing on the wall. And I think that for everybody's sake, whether you're on the side of wanting Biden to stay in or wanting Biden to pull out, I think everyone would really like to, by the end of this weekend, know what the future is. I think that the tide has turned against Joe Biden, and if I had to bet, I think having the entirety of the leadership of his party now effectively telling him that he needs to step aside, would be very hard to maintain a candidacy in those circumstances. But he might. But either way, the party would be well served at the end of this Republican convention week, with not very much time before the Democratic convention, either way, to know by Monday what the answer is.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.